Welcome to the LSU Sports Insider podcast, an emergency edition of the LSU Sports Insider brought to you by the journalists at The Advocate, NOLA.com, and the Times-Picayune. I'm Perryn Keys. I'm joined here by Wilson Alexander, our lead LSU football beat reporter. We are typically here on Mondays and Thursdays, but we decided to jump into the studio here on Wednesday afternoon to discuss the issue at hand. The issue at hand, of course, being LSU parting ways with defensive coordinator Matt House and three other defensive assistant coaches. So we will get into it here. Wilson, how you doing? You had a fun morning this morning.
Nothing really going on today, Perryn. It's been really chill, you know?
That's the way it is when football season ends. You think you're going to take a deep breath.
Yeah,
and
the season's over. There's nothing
yeah, that's right.
It's been the busiest 2 days stretch in like weeks.
That's what typically. I'm actually reminded of the 2019 season. This was very much not like the 2019 season, but you know, everybody has this big, huge, joyous moment. LSU beats Clemson in the national championship game in the Superdome. And, you know, the victory laps had barely even started before you start seeing players leaving left and right. The Odell Beckham
I was going to say, not even
unfolded.
that. Yeah, that made it like on the field post-game, it started getting chaotic in the hours that
Let
followed.
it never be said that the LSU football beat is not interesting at the very least. We are here, as I said, we are typically here on Mondays and Thursdays on all our social channels, specifically the LSU Tigers on NOLA.com YouTube channel. We are there live every Monday and Thursday, but if you don't catch us live, you can catch us on those same channels after the fact. You can also catch us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, wherever the finer podcasts are found. We are brought to you today and every day by Champion Wealth Strategies. Champion Wealth Strategies is a national financial services firm specializing in the capital markets, securities, insurance, 401ks, and college and retirement planning. Our broker-dealer is LPL, financial member FINRA, SIPC. As you know, investments are not FDIC insured, may lose value, and have no bank guarantee. Contact Champion Wealth Strategies and plan like a champion today. Two other things, of course, we would love for you to subscribe to The Advocate. To do that, you go to theadvocate.com/subscribe and get a hold of our newsletter. See, if you're a subscriber to our newsletter, you would get the breaking news. You would have gotten the breaking news today in your inbox that LSU had parted ways with Matt House. To do that, to sign up, you go to theadvocate.com/LSU newsletter. So Wilson, we were having a pleasant morning together here. And then, obviously, the news that so many LSU fans, frankly, had hoped for, whether that was fair or not, or nice or not, they get word that Matt House, or you'd get word that Matt House was going to be leaving LSU. We've been through this all season long, if not 2 seasons, but certainly this season, more importantly. 108th in total defense. You all know some of the numbers. 108th in total defense, 87th in run defense, 118th in pass defense, 117th on third down. This was the worst LSU defense in many, many, many years, probably going back to the 98.
Or since, Bo Pelini's defense.
Oh, well, yes. How could we just decided we're not going to pretend
out of our brains.
that the 2020 season never happened because of COVID. So, yes, you're right. I'd be remiss if I didn't mention the 2020 defense. So, I will let you take it away. And not only Matt House, but 3 other assistant coaches. Tell us what's going down.
So this morning, Brian Kelly informed Matt House, Robert Steeples, the cornerbacks coach, Kerry Cooper, the safeties coach, and Jimmy Lindsey, who's technically the defensive line coach, or at least that's what he was hired to be, but did not actually serve in that capacity this season because he'd had a medical issue and had to step away 2 days before preseason camp. But he already got caught up in this as well. So Brian Kelly informed them this morning that they were, being fired, they were being let go, and now he has to overhaul his defensive staff. John Jancic has been retained. Jancic was the outside linebackers coach and special teams coordinator going into preseason camp. And then when Lindsey had to step away, he had to go onto the defensive line. That was not an area of expertise for John Jancic. And so that's probably kind of the reason, or at least one of the reasons that he's still going to be on staff. But what his role will be is unclear moving forward and has yet to be determined. Same thing with Bob Diaco. He was not fired this morning. He had stepped in to coach outside linebackers and special teams when they shuffled everything around and Jancic moved over, and he is still on staff as well. But Brian Kelly makes a a massive overhaul today. It was clear that changes needed to be made on the defensive side of the ball in some capacity. Who that was going to include, what that was going to mean, we had to wait to find out. But obviously, Kelly sees this as needed to be a changing of the guard. And Brian, he's going to now go into his third season needing to replace both of his top assistants.
That's right, because Mike Denbrock obviously left for Notre Dame was it last week or the week before? It's all
just
running
before
together
Christmas.
now. That's right, right before Christmas. So this is going to cost LSU a little bit of money. Scott Woodward has said many times that he believes in human capital, as he puts it. And LSU has certainly shown over the years that it's willing to shell out big dollars for the top staff, or one of the top staffs, the highest paid staffs in the nation, but also that they're willing to move on from somebody who they deem wasn't up to the job, or maybe was a mistake in hiring. How much is this going to cost LSU?
In total, it's about $5.5 million or so, just over 5.4. Matt House, if you recall, received a contract extension earlier this year that was going to take him through the 2025 season. And it expired right around this time, right at the beginning of the year in 2026. And so he's going to be owed just over $3.7 million. Jimmy Lindsey's is going to be over $700,000. He had signed a fairly lucrative contract when LSU got him away from South Carolina.
He was seen as a big get.
Yeah, and Brian Kelly thought he checked quite a few boxes, and it was just kind of an unfortunate situation, something out of Jimmy Lindsey's control. He had that medical issue. Right before preseason camp, had to get taken away from the facility in an ambulance, and he was able to return to the team in November, but he wasn't in an on-field capacity. And so, but that was a 3-year deal that LSU signed him to just this year. And now moving on from him, this quickly, that's going to be a little bit costly. And then Kerry Cooks and Robert Steeples, right over $500,000 each, about $510,000 for both of them. They were going to be entering the last year of their contracts this season. They were actually LSU has thrown a lot of money around on this staff. Right. They were two of the lower paid assistants on this staff. Lower paid being very relative. We're still making six figures and all that. But that's kind of how it shakes out.
So we could just start sort of aimlessly throwing names around. We're not going to do that. It's just too early, I think, at this point for us to take what would really be nothing more than educated guesses. But I would say if LSU fans are wondering whether Brian Kelly is afraid to make a good hire, whether he can discern good assistant coaches, good coordinators or not, I'm just going to read to you all 5 names. These are all names of defensive coordinators who served under Brian Kelly when he was at Notre Dame. Bob Diaco, Brian Van Gorder, Mike Elko, Clark Lee, Marcus Freeman. 4 of those guys are either head coaches or former head coaches, and Van Gorder, I don't believe he's ever been a head coach, but he's certainly as well thought of as any defensive coordinator out there. So I think the idea, Wilson, when I was thinking about this today when this news broke, I was reminded, and I believe, check me on this, I believe this was at the Monday press conference that he typically has after a game. I think it was after Ole Miss. And that,
taking
of course,
back, taking me a few months back.
Well, but the reason, of course, that was when, LSU fans were about ready to tear their hair out after pretty much every game, having watched this defense. But that obviously stung pretty bad because, 55 points. I think that was the most yards that LSU has ever given up.
6 yards allowed, school record.
So it was hot. It was hot in this town. And I do remember very specifically, as I say, I believe it was the Ole Miss press conference, the post-Ole Miss press conference, that he said, he stopped almost in the middle of a question, said, look, I came to LSU. I don't have time. I came to LSU here to win championships. I don't have time to get this, in so many words, basically saying we're not going down the road to build this thing. We're here to win. We're here to win now. We're here to win fast. I think this is really sort of a manifestation of that thought process, is it not?
In what way do you mean?
We're not gonna wait around. We're not gonna wait one more year on Matt House to see if he can sort of get this thing to turn the corner. This is gonna be a lot of money, and we think he's a good cut because I do believe that. I think we've been told that Brian Kelly thought very highly of Matt House, certainly up to this point. But this appears to be the case that no, we just can't afford to wait around to see if this thing is going to get better. We have to make a fresh start now, a wholesale fresh start now.
Yeah, when you look back over over this year, right after that Ole Miss game, the press conference that you're referring to, Brian Kelly came out and said that he had the utmost confidence in Matt House. That was right after that game. They made it an adjustment to bring in Pete Jenkins to try to help with that defensive line. And over the second half of the year, Brian Kelly even repeatedly said he thought that the LSU's defensive front had been playing better down the stretch. But if it wasn't, and there was certainly, we said this on the podcast, and I still feel confident saying this, that it wasn't just an automatic thing at the end of the regular season that Brian Kelly was going to fire Matt House.
Right.
There was certainly those around, Baton Rouge and LSU sources who thought that he might be retained. But Kelly never, fully obviously made that decision. That none of that was like fully finalized here until just, now. And Kelly said that, if it wasn't something that if he hadn't already made this decision ahead of the bowl game, it probably became pretty darn apparent in the ReliaQuest Bowl that something had to change.
Right.
Going up against a Wisconsin offense that was rather listless all year, had already had his top running back opt out, its center opt out, and then Tanner Mordecai has a career day. He'd thrown 6 touchdowns all season. He ends up, with throwing for a season high in yards and touchdowns. And Wisconsin has, the most yards it had all its season, and scores 31 points. And they even had to end up just going to a base defense because, especially there in the second half, it ended up working, winning the game. But once you got through that, it was obvious that changes were coming, and we all knew that. I think it probably became very apparent that changes needed to, at least in Brian Kelly's mind, include Matt House. And so, because he had said himself, post game that he wanted continuity through the early signing period and through the bowl game. So once they got through the bowl game, there was really nothing else holding this up. And it is urgent. It's something that has to happen because you can't. You're at LSU. You're in the SEC. You've got teams that it's like that old saying, like, if you're not working somewhere else, someone somewhere else is. Yeah. And they had to make some decisions that aren't easy decisions to make, affect people and their families. Right. But that were, as Kelly has always said, like, no one person is bigger than the program, and they needed to, ultimately made the decision to move on from most of their defensive staff because they got to be better on that side of the ball immediately. It held them back this year from competing for a championship. You could say that hey, maybe Matt House did not have the same level of personnel that a typical LSU defensive coordinator has, and I think some of that's probably fair. Certainly in the secondary, as you've said on many occasions, the LSU's used to having absolute dudes in the secondary, and God bless these young men, but they weren't at the level. That's not a shot. They just weren't at the level of Patrick Peterson, Tyrann Mathieu, all the other greats. Draft picks. And, maybe some of these freshmen can develop, but at the moment they're freshmen. Right. But what I was going to get to, the issue I was going to bring up, and feel free to give your 2 cents or maybe shy away from this, but I think the question: would it not be fair to say that it was questionable whether players were being developed to the level that they could have seen? It's easy to do. It's easy to pull out names, and I don't mean to pile on to these guys, but Harold Perkins did not. We discussed this on the last podcast. Mm-hmm. You mentioned that the numbers, the actual season totals, are really not the best. 75 tackles, 75 tackles, 13 tackles for loss, 5.5 sacks, I believe, and some other hurries, but it felt underwhelming. It seemed pretty respectable, but by the same token, there was no aside. And I'll give him all the credit in the world for making the read and the interception in the Missouri game, which definitely was a turning point in that game. But generally speaking, he was not the game wrecker that you expected him to be. He was not. He did not flash, and as he did so many times as a raw, true freshman. Savion, again, not to pile on to any specific player, but Savion Jones. Brian Kelly said it himself. He thought that Savion Jones in the preseason was primed for a big year. Use the word monster. Right. Yeah. Savion Jones, I think, had 2 tackles in the Wisconsin game, and that was very emblematic of sort of the season he's had. So just to say that maybe development, it was fair that maybe these guys weren't getting the level of development that you thought they might from a well-paid defensive coordinator. And they weren't getting maximized. I think that's the thing when I look back over this season, that, LSU did not have the talent that it's used to having in the secondary, did not have the talent that it needed in the secondary, probably at times, to run some different coverages. The coverage was always soft. But at the same time, we've talked about this, like, they were just missing tackles, like fundamental stuff
Yes.
that has to be a lot better. Missed tackles
Run
and bad
fits,
run fits,
Yep.
like things like that should be able to be improved going into next year. Even if so maybe your personnel is going to, a lot of it's maybe is going to be returning, like it's got to get coached up better. It just does. And and especially in those sort of fundamental areas, you can be a better defense next year if you clean up some of those very basic things between now and the opener against USC in Las Vegas. And, because of those things, like that combined with like we said, like Harold Perkins is the best example of it, like not maximizing the talent that you have available to you. Harold's position was in flux for most of the season. They finally kind of found a role for him that sort of made sense because he didn't look comfortable at inside linebacker. But then when they put him in one spot, he was kind of away from the ball, which sometimes he was able to make some good plays, like the Missouri game. We saw some tackles in the flat that was just like, there's Harold. Right. But he also, never using him as a spy against Alabama was probably the most the best example, the most maybe egregious offense per se that you saw this season. And that's probably the thing that like you can pin on the staff in particular is that like they weren't able to maximize what was available to them, even if what was available to them necessarily wasn't like we saw last year. The defense was much better because when they had some better players, and so. This year, obviously, that wasn't there, but it was just, when you have players that aren't up to the standard that you're expecting to, and coaches that maybe aren't developing them quite well enough or putting them in the right spot schematically, like your defense is going to be what it was this year, and that just can't continue. That couldn't continue.
And you said it, not to repeat the same thing over and over, but I mean, you said it very, I think, well and succinctly was, you had a month or almost a month to get these guys ready to play, maybe at the very least a little bit more fundamentally sound against Wisconsin, and you just did not see that. It did not. There was no demonstrable showing of improvement.
There really wasn't. Almost a regression in some ways. Right. And I mean, I think the most glaring example of it was two of Wisconsin's touchdowns. There was the 53-yarder. It was just a basic
run.
Yeah. It was just no, that wasn't even the cutback run. This was a slant in the first half, where LSU looked like it was probably playing man coverage. It's hard to tell based on TV copy. We don't get the all 22 like you can very easily in the NFL, and so. But somebody missed a tackle, and then there was a bad angle with another missed tackle. Boom, touchdown, big explosive play, and then the 33-yard touchdown, Wisconsin's last touchdown in that third quarter, where the defensive front just got folded. There was just a massive hole, 33-yard touchdown for a guy who was a backup running back all season.
Never got touched.
He cuts back through that. Never got touched. And like you said, you had a month to prepare, and that's what happened.
Right.
And so that's why it's like, if it wasn't already something that Brian Kelly had decided, that probably finalized his decision.
One other thing to get into before we wrap it up, as we said, this is an emergency podcast. It's not the typical length, but we felt we had to get in here and discuss this. It's too big. As it relates to recruiting, I don't know. I think you're correct, Wilson. We were talking before we got on the air. I don't know that this has a tremendous effect on recruiting. LSU signed 15 defensive players in the early period. And as you mentioned, they got a commitment basically on New Year's Eve or right at midnight Eastern time on New Year's Day from Dominic McKinley. But none of those defensive staffers were really the lead recruiters for Dominic McKinley either.
No, when we saw LSU's coaches go in home with his family, it was Frank Wilson and Brian Kelly, and obviously Brian Kelly made quite a bit of sense there. But Frank Wilson has been very active on the recruiting trail over the last month, and with McKinley as well, and maybe in particular. I mean, like he's the associate head coach, the running backs coach, and he has such deep Louisiana recruiting ties that he was very, very big in McKinley's recruitment there down the stretch, being that coach on the in-home visit. And so I think LSU was recruiting him and maybe even some others here over the last month, knowing that some changes were coming and, so maybe coaching with, recruiting with some guys who were certainly going to be on staff next season.
Big changes afoot. Big changes have been made for the LSU coaching staff to the LSU. Go ahead.
Oh, just sorry. Yeah, sorry not to. It was just another thought that kind of came to mind about how I don't think it's going to have like a really big effect on recruiting. Like one, obviously the 2024 class is all pretty much signed. Dominic McKinley will ink in February. Maybe they can get Terry Bussey as well. But also like the 2025 class, they're early enough in that cycle still where like they can get people in and continue to recruit down the stretch. But also, like in this 2024 class, they recruited so much locally and regionally in this class that a lot of it felt more so like guys who maybe just wanted to play at LSU instead of, they still like obviously had to like those coaches to commit to them and to sign with them. But when you're getting guys out of New Orleans and that kind of thing, you're less prone to losing somebody simply because a coach leaves.
Correct. Local kids who probably want to stay close to home probably had LSU as their first choice growing up. So many of them. We will leave it here for now. We will be back here on Thursday. We are typically here again every Monday and Thursday on all our social channels, specifically our YouTube channel, LSU Tigers on NOLA.com. Mondays and Thursdays live. If you do not catch us live, you can catch us after the fact on that same YouTube channel. Please subscribe. Please subscribe to The Advocate. To do that, you go to theadvocate.com/subscribe. And if you don't already subscribe to our newsletter, please do so. To do that, you go to theadvocate.com/LSU newsletter. We are also on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, wherever other finer podcasts are found. And we are brought to you today and every day by Champion Wealth Strategies. To learn more, go to championwealthstrategies.com and plan like a champion today. Change is ahead for LSU. Change is seemingly always ahead for LSU. It will be go ahead, Wilson.
Yeah, that's the thing. Just to, as we sign off here, to note, it's like, the news is just beginning.
That's exactly
the
right.
offseason is really just beginning. This has been a very busy 2 days with Mekhi Wingo entering the portal, I'm sure, or not entering the portal, what am I saying? Declaring for the draft.
Correct.
Zillion Turd entering the portal, Jaylen Brown entering the portal, and I'm sure we'll get to that maybe more tomorrow on tomorrow's podcast. But Brian Kelly now has to go offensive coordinator, defensive line coach, linebackers coach, safeties coach, cornerbacks coach. Those are all openings on the staff that have to be addressed. So it's going to be quite the interesting offseason as he goes into year 3.
He's got quite a job ahead of him. And so with that in mind, it's probably a good thing the recruiting is almost done for 2024.
Oh, yeah.
For Wilson Alexander, I am Perryn Keys. This has been the LSU Sports Insider.